The PlayStation 2 had quite the collection of strange games. Many of these were low-budget titles that could be produced quickly and wouldn't bankrupt the company even if they flopped. Because games like these were pretty low risk to make, game devs had a lot more room to experiment, and we ended up with a ton of unconventional and outright weird projects. You want to play a game about being a mosquito and sucking people's blood? No? Huh. Well, back to the drawing board then. Anyways, today I've played 3 of what I consider to be the weirdest PS2 games, so let's talk about them. Robot Alchemic Drive, also known as RAD or Gigantic Drive in Japan, was released in August of 2002 and got an English release later that same year. You've probably seen some clips from this game's, interesting English dub. It was developed by a company called Sandlot, which actually made quite a few other mecha-inspired games like the Earth Defense Force series and is still around today. They had help from… wait, what? That can't be right. Gainax? The studio that made Evangelion? Yeah, I was pretty surprised to find this out too. But I guess that explains, certain parts of the story.
Human genocide mode.
The characters were designed by Toshihiro Kawamoto, who also worked on Cowboy Bebop, so if you, like me, were wondering why the art style seemed oddly familiar, that's why. The music for the game was composed by Masafumi Takada, who most of you probably know from his work on the Danganronpa games. According to an interview with someone at Enix, Rad's publisher, their aim was to create an innovative, anime-inspired game where you could control a bunch of giant robots. Well, they certainly made something like that. When Rad came out, it had surprisingly positive reviews. It got a 30 out of 40 from Famitsu, a 7.3 out of 10 from IGN, and 4 out of 5 stars from the official US PlayStation magazine. Yeah, you guys remember when consoles had their own magazines? Despite its reputation as a cheap shovelware-esque title, it seems like the developers were actually pretty proud of what they made here, and I honestly think they should be. The game itself starts with you choosing one of 3 characters to play as and one of 3 robots to use. Each character has their own fully fleshed out route, but since we're not focusing solely on Rad today, I'll just go over the points consistent in each one. Regardless of who you choose, you are the sole heir to the now bankrupt Sugioka family, who used all their wealth to invest in these humanoid robots called Megaknights. It's initially said that they weren't ever intended to be weapons, but I have a hard time believing that because, well, what else would you use these giant robots for? To stand around and look cool? As you arrive at the train station to talk to your friend Anal, a mysterious being known as a Volgara shows up and starts wreaking havoc on the city. Our character is, as we find out, the chairman of the Trilenium Committee founded by our father, so we have an obligation to use the Evangelion Megaknight and fight the Volgara. Apparently. Not sure why no one else was taught how to use these things. While we're running to the committee building, the news starts reporting on the giant alien invading our city, and as a side note, I have to mention how funny of a character the news reporter is. She's constantly being almost comedically pessimistic and goes through this strangely dark emotional breakdown about halfway through the game. It's, a roller coaster of emotions, that's for sure. Anyways, the Mega Knight is launched and we manage to fight off the Volgara by punching it to death. But Senjo isn't safe yet, there's 53 missions to get to. So for the sake of time, I'll just go over the most important plot points. We start getting paid to fight the weird robot aliens and get bonus rewards if we manage to protect specific buildings, and we can use that money to upgrade our Mega Knight with things like new weapons or better defenses. At certain points you get thrown into flashback scenes, which you'll know are flashbacks because they have a yellow filter over them for some reason, even though it looks like we remain the same age. These explain our protagonist's backstory, and I guess we're haunted by some kind of demon? I genuinely don't think it's ever truly explained why, but during flashbacks we hear a disembodied voice that tells us,
"The end is near."
I can only assume that this voice we hear belongs to the Mega Knight, so I guess we have some kind of psychic connection to them. Honestly, the majority of Rad's story isn't super important until the end of the game, where things get weird. It takes a very abrupt Evangelion-like turn, and our Volgara goes on an uncontrollable rampage, apparently awakening human genocide mode. Why does that exist in the first place? And since the committee knew it existed, why didn't they take precautions to stop it from ever being awakened? This impending genocide we've just unleashed is supposedly meant to save humankind, because the Mega Knights are apparently the final form of humans. Wow, what a wonderful future to look forward to, right? We decide that we must become one with the Mega Knight, which just consists of us saying, "We are one," to win it over. Well, that was easy. Why didn't we just do that in the first place? So with our Mega Knight controllable once again, we get back into the usual swing of things with a surprise appearance from, Godzilla? You know what? So much other insane shit has happened by this point. I'll welcome Godzilla with open arms. The news reporter has her own character arc, and we actually develop our relationship with the love interest, Ellen, so you can tell that the story is nearing its end, judging by how they're rushing from one plot point to another. We take the fight to where the Volgara are building strange, city-like structures, presumably to create more of their kind. Upon reaching the final episode, a mysterious Volgara that kinda reminds me of the giant robot from Power Rangers shows up, Asmodeus. This is our toughest enemy yet, however, you don't really need to change up your technique to beat it. Even though Dr. Wiltz claims that it can't be beaten. Oh, did I mention this guy's name is Dr. Wiltz? Sorry, it doesn't come up that often, so it's easy to forget. Regardless, we do manage to take down the Doomsday weapon with our usual strategy of punching it till it falls over. It seems a little underwhelming, but in the moment, my heart was genuinely racing throughout this fight. Even considering all the problems with its story, Rad really excels at exciting mecha combat. So we've taken down Asmodeus, and the world is saved! Our protagonist gives a short spiel about how the Mega Knights were always watching over everyone, which is a little ironic considering that they have a genocide mode, but sure. We're told that because of the Volgara attacks, we've lost a whole third of the entire human population. It's still a happier ending than Evangelion, I guess? The other characters' fates are told to us, which depend on what buildings you protect and the actions you take throughout the story. It's also mentioned that there's a chance the Volgara could someday come back to Earth, so we haven't even truly defeated them. Maybe they were hoping for a sequel? They touch on a lot of past characters and story beats in the epilogue, but there's still plenty of plot holes left unfilled, and I feel like the ending of the game just leaves you with more questions than answers. I have a sneaking suspicion that the game was getting rushed towards the end of its development because of how fast-paced the story becomes leading up to the final mission, as well as the aforementioned plot holes. I've been wondering since I beat the game if there was a previous version of the story that gave more context to everything happening and wrapped things up neatly, but even if there is, I doubt we'll ever get to see that. The story is fun enough to follow along with, as long as you don't think about things too hard, though it definitely drags on at certain points. But really, when you're playing Rad, I think what you're playing for is the gameplay. Or, well, the laugh of the dub. Now, I will readily admit that I am not a huge fan of the mecha genre. However, I absolutely loved Rad. It's such a genuinely fun game to play, and not just because of its goofy English dub, though that's definitely a factor. I think where Rad really shines is in its huge, city-destroying fights against the Volgara. And the developers must have known that considering there are a lot of battles throughout the game's runtime. While it seems like this might get boring after a while, Rad manages to keep most fights feeling fresh with new kinds of missions, different types of enemies, and various upgrades for your Mega Knight. Don't get me wrong, there were some battles that I felt were solely filler content, but overall it really kept me engaged while playing. Each Rad's roughly around 13 hours long, so it provides you with a lot of content without overstaying its welcome. Another thing I have to praise Rad for is its controls. I know this is something everyone brings up when talking about the game, but they're a huge part of what makes it stand out. There are two control schemes in Rad. Easy, which is simplified and allows you to control your Mega Knight using the D-pad, and Normal, the more immersive control scheme, where you use R1 and L1 to take right and left steps respectively. To turn, you have to hold either R1 and R2 or L1 and L2. And yes, it's exactly as tedious as it sounds. I'll be completely transparent here and say that I could not wrap my head around the normal controls, but I still really enjoyed the game using the easy ones. Of course, it can be frustrating to play at times, but Rad was a game made in the early 2000s, and what came from that age doesn't have some kind of jank. Robot Alchemic Drive really is a charming game. I played Rad just to see how bad the English dub was for myself, and I ended up genuinely enjoying it. The clunky controls are certainly hard to get used to, but once you get the hang of them, you'll have so much fun beating up other giant robots and seeing them go flying into a building. The entire game feels like you're watching a cheesy mech anime, and I feel like that's a big part of its charm. Even if you're not a fan of the mecha genre, I would still highly recommend giving it a try because you might end up loving it. Also, if you're enjoying this video so far, I'd really appreciate if you gave it a like, comment, and subscribe so more people can see it. Thank you! Michigan Report from Hell, originally known simply as Michigan, released in Japan in 2004 and Europe in 2005. This one was made by someone many horror fans will recognize, Suda51. He's known for his work on the Fatal Frame and No More Heroes series, but Michigan is probably his most forgotten project. The composer for this game was... wait, it was also Takata? Just how many games did this guy work on? Michigan is a survival horror game and was developed by Suda51's company, Grasshopper Manufacture. It actually came about because, at the time, the company was taking on contract work to keep its doors open, and the president of Spike, later known as Spike Chunsoft, reached out to Suda to come up with a game together. Suda later said that development had many twists and turns and that the company lacked the experience to really bring his vision to life. Surprisingly enough, the game actually sold pretty well, as it was one of the top 500 best-selling video games in Japan when it came out. Most of the reviews, however, were mixed, with Metacritic giving it a 53 out of 100, Famitsu giving it a 30 out of 40, and XPlay giving it a 2 out of 5. The main complaints were about Michigan's terrible writing and lackluster mechanics. Me personally, I feel like the reviews were a bit harsh, but maybe I just have low standards. Our protagonist is a cameraman for Zaka TV, a news agency based in Chicago. After a mysterious fog suddenly descends upon the city and the government orders residents to evacuate, we're sent out with the rest of our crew to cover the developing story. It doesn't take long until we run into our first monster, and from there, things only get worse for us. The lead reporter, Pamela Martell, is killed by one of these creatures, and she's very swiftly replaced by another. Because I guess the show must go on, no matter how dangerous it is. We gotta get this juicy scoop before anyone else can, after all. About halfway through the game, the protagonist and the sound guy, Briscoe, get into a crash that totals the news van, but the two are apparently completely unharmed. Or at least fine enough to hike across the mountains to a campground. Maybe we're secretly some kind of superhuman. After a lot of pretty aimless wandering around and searching for survivors, as well as being manipulated by the chief of Zaka TV into continuing our report despite the dangers, we finally discover that the origin of the monsters is a virus created by one Dr. O'Connor. We meet the man himself, and he reveals that this virus was supposed to be a bioweapon used against enemies of the United States. And Zaka Group, the parent company of Zaka TV, apparently. A plane carrying the virus crashed into Lake Michigan, leading to this whole situation that we're now a part of. Dr. O'Connor then transforms into a monster, having been infected himself, but not before letting us know that a vaccine does exist. So we head off to find said vaccine, and although most people who knew anything about it are already deceased, we instead manage to find a list of its ingredients and try to find all of those things at a convenience store. After we somehow do, we rush to the airport where a military evacuation is set to take place. There we run into some guy who seems to be patient zero of the virus, and after we kill him, the fog and the monsters disappear. Now we can get to the lighthouse and direct the plane to land so we can escape. However, of course, things don't go quite as planned. On the way up, Briscoe turns into a monster, but apparently still has enough of a mind to jump out of a window, saving us. We then see the protagonist start to record a video documenting the truth behind the incident in Chicago, but in one last plot twist, he's taken out by an assassin. There was quite a bit that I left out of the story summary, but this is what the main plot of the game boils down to. You pretty much just go from location to location and watch things happen in front of you, but there is some actual gameplay. While reporting, you have to interact with certain objects in the environment to advance the story, and sometimes you enter, combat, which just consists of pointing your camera at monsters so the reporter can shoot them. You can sometimes shove them out of the way if something dangerous is about to happen, which sends them ragdolling across the room. I think maybe we should reconsider our career as a cameraman and get into wrestling or something. Throughout the story, there's points where you can save the reporter you're currently paired up with, or let them die, replacing them with another unfortunate young lady in your next mission. It's a pretty interesting concept and does tie into which of the 4 endings you get. There's also a strange morality system in Michigan that determines which ending you'll see, and this is where the game's mechanics get very questionable. You can choose to film specific things that fit into one of 3 categories: immoral, suspense, or erotic. You get immoral points by capturing footage of people being attacked by monsters when you could be helping them. Suspense points are given when you record anything scary or intense happening, and as you can imagine, you'll end up with a ton of these by the end of the game. Erotic points are gained by filming, well, erotic things. These vary from indecent magazines to entire cutscenes of characters undressing and showering. You can also farm them by crouching under the reporter and pointing your camera up during a report. Don't ask how I found that out. It's obviously far from perfect, and I think one of my main complaints is that most of the major plot points aren't found through investigating, but are usually just told to you in a needlessly long info dump by another character. But again, that kind of adds to the charm, at least in my opinion. Your typical controls for moving the camera and looking around are inverted, which was kind of disorienting to me, so I did end up solving the keybinds to make it feel more normal. Besides that though, I did enjoy the gameplay, even if it was kind of a glorified walking simulator. It's only about 3 to 4 hours long, so if you have a spare evening, I'd say it's worth checking out. The idea is pretty unique, and I have to give the devs credit for trying their best with what they had. Michigan is overall a pretty fun game to play, and it's a nice change of pace from survival horror games that take themselves super seriously. It reminds me of those low-budget horror movies you'd see in the $5 bin at Walmart. It's very campy and contains a lot of your typical horror tropes, and honestly I feel like it could be adapted to a movie of its own without changing a thing. I mean, there's plenty of horror films that use the journalist investigating a strange incident premise. The voice acting in the English release is of a similar quality to Rad's, and really just contributes to that bad horror movie feeling. Some of these line deliveries will stick with me forever.
Bad monsters in heaven. I mean, hell.
Demolition Girl is probably the weirdest game I've ever played. And that's saying a lot when Zelda's adventure is right there. We'll get to that one some other time. Demolition Girl released in Japan in 2004 and managed to get a European release in 2005, which was somehow given an all-ages PEGI rating. Did they even play the game? Or just, like, look at the box art? It was honestly kind of hard to find development information regarding this title, and no, it doesn't matter how desperate I am, I'm not going to the Giantess wiki. The game was developed by Tamsoft, who worked on the Senran Kagura games. Yeah, actually, that makes sense. Demolition Girl is part of a series of games released by D3 publisher called Simple, which consists of cheap titles for a wide range of consoles. The main character of Demolition Girl, Riho Futaba, is a recurring character throughout these games. I couldn't find any critic reviews, unfortunately, but I imagine they'd be pretty negative. There's not much of a story in Demolition Girl, as you probably expected. Riho Futaba, a model who came to the beach for a photo shoot, gets bitten by a strange alien crab thing, and then becomes a giant. We have to stop her rampage over the course of 6 missions, the first of which has you collect data on her body. Yeah. You have to get pretty close for this and stay within that range for a good while, so you'd better hope anyone you live with doesn't walk in on you during that time. Or really at any point during this game. Might be a little hard to explain. In the next mission, we have to put Riho to sleep by firing a bunch of anesthetic missiles at her. This sounds simple enough in theory, but when you're actually playing the game, it's pretty hard to get the missile to go exactly where you want. You're gonna spend the bulk of the mission making tiny adjustments to your aim, since even slightly moving the stick makes a pretty wide turn, and there's no way to adjust the sensitivity. Anyways, Riho finally falls asleep after like a billion tranquilizers, and in the next chapter we have to protect the helicopters flying her away. I have no clue how they're managing to hold her up without the helicopters being dragged down into the ocean by her weight, but I just won't question it. They're being attacked by swarms of aliens, so we, of course, have to defeat them. The already bad controls get even worse in this level, and it doesn't help that you're constantly spinning around while trying to change directions. I never get motion sick while playing games, but this made me a little dizzy. No matter how well you do in this level, the helicopters do get shot down into the ocean, taking Riho with them. We move on to Chapter 4, where we discover that Riho has returned to land, now with one of the aliens attached to her head. This somehow gives her the ability to shoot her own missiles at you, and they're kinda tricky to dodge and do a ton of damage, so I had to retry this mission a few times to clear it. She also has laser eyes now, though they're not nearly as dangerous as the missiles. And her last attack is... Huh? Wait, isn't that the Kamehameha from Dragon Ball? Well, putting that aside, we just gotta keep shooting at that pesky alien on her head, and eventually we destroy it. Chapter 5 is probably the worst mission I've ever played in any game. Riho is storming towards Tokyo, and we have to hold her off until the residents are evacuated. We're put in the tank this time around, but that doesn't make things any easier. Actually, I'd argue that it makes our mission way harder because we have to avoid all the cars just parked in the middle of the highway, and more coming straight toward us. If you run into a vehicle, you'll take a devastating amount of damage, and these hitboxes are genuinely absurd. It's a whole battle in and of itself, having to constantly look between where Riho is to make sure you're actually hitting her and that she's not throwing something at you, and at the road where people will just drive head-on into a tank. I've seen plenty of bad drivers, but running right into a heavily armored vehicle that you can clearly see from a distance away? These people shouldn't be on the road in the first place! It took me 30 whole minutes just to get past this level, and I'm never playing it again. It's just terribly designed, and I don't know how the devs thought this would be fun to play. At least they're kind enough to give you a chapter select menu after beating the game. In the final mission, Riho is climbing up a skyscraper towards one of the aliens, and we have to shrink her down using an antidote before she can get to the top. You have to be very careful with your aim in this level since the antidote takes a good few seconds to reload. While you're trying to hit Riho, the alien will constantly shoot those lock-on missiles at you from Chapter 4, and sometimes does this insane AoE attack that's basically impossible to avoid if you're near the top of the skyscrapers, which you will be, since that's where Riho is. Also, I don't know if I just got really bad RNG or what, but when I was playing, it would constantly spam this attack over and over again. Once Riho is small enough, you have to take out the alien, which is no easy task, considering those missiles and the AoE attack I mentioned earlier. It's way harder to avoid now because if you want your shots to actually land, you'll have to stay pretty level with the alien. This one also took me quite a few tries, but I pulled through, and so we're rewarded with the ending of Demolition Girl. We did all that for this? Well, that was Demolition Girl. It's a very strange game that I'm not sure would fly today, at least in the West. especially not with an all ages rating. It has very little story, and the gameplay, which could be fun, is really dragged down by its awful controls. They're janky and way too sensitive at times, but not responsive enough at others, making maneuvering your vehicle quite the challenge. As for if I would recommend it, I mean, it's supposed to take about an hour to beat, so as long as you can stand the controls and poor design choices, it makes for a good game to have a quick laugh at. I don't think I'd say Demolition Girl is among my favorites, but it's certainly something I played. So why don't we see games like these anymore? Cheap shovelware does still exist. Just look at the Switch eShop or Steam new releases. They're everywhere, and the development of AI is only making it easier to create quick cash grabs. However, I don't really consider the games I mentioned in this video to be shovelware. It's clear the developers were passionate about what they were creating, especially clear in cases like Demolition Girls, and they tried their hardest with their limited budgets and time constraints, not to mention hardware limitations at the time. My personal theory is that these budget games are rarer nowadays because of the fact that it's much more expensive to develop games now compared to the time when these were made. And it seems like today most AAA developers want to spend years and years and millions upon millions of dollars making one game. But that can be a huge gamble. At least with these budget titles, even if they didn't sell well, the company wasn't out years of wasted time and an absurd amount of money. But in the end, these games will live on in infamy, not because of how great they are, but because they were so weird and unlike anything we'd get today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed. If you don't know me, I'm Pythea, and I love talking about all kinds of retro games. I know I made some videos on gacha games before this, and while I do love to gamble, that's not really where my passion lies. So I really do hope this video was entertaining, and maybe even convince you to try out one of these games for yourself. I have plenty more videos planned about other old games, so if you like this video and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate if you did to see my future content. Also, as a side note, this video is probably coming out right as I start art school, so uploads may be a bit slower, and I just ask for your patience because I do need to focus on my studies. I'll see you all again soon, so for now, bye bye!